What is an apostate? The dictionary definition is a person who abandons or renounces a religious or political belief or principle. The Watchtower, however, defines it as a person who rejects the Watchtower Society and actively works against God's Holy Spirit. But who would be labeled an apostate? Well, someone who persistently questions Watchtower teachings, or voices doubts over the teachings, or someone who chooses to leave because of those doubts. Basically, anyone who questions, doubts, or conscientiously objects to Watchtower teachings will be labeled an apostate. The very act of questioning Watchtower teaching is viewed to be working against God's Holy Spirit, and therefore the individual would be disfellowshipped and labeled an apostate. But what really are the consequences of apostasy? Let's look at the spiritual consequences. Active Jehovah's Witnesses are told that apostasy is an unforgivable sin. Those who are working, or who have worked against God's Holy Spirit, will be written out of the book of life. The Watchtower quotes Bible verses at Luke 12:10 and Hebrews 10:26 and 27, where Jesus said that blasphemy against the Holy Spirit was unforgivable. And Paul said, "There is no sacrifice for sins left for one who practices sin willfully despite knowing the truth." But interestingly, those labeled apostate by the Watchtower Society need not speak against the Holy Spirit or practice sin willfully despite knowing the truth. They merely need to question or doubt the teachings of the Watchtower Society. The Society claims that it is the sole channel of God's Holy Spirit on earth. But with what evidence do they prove this? The answer is simply none. Anyone who questions this or any other Watchtower doctrine will be labeled as an apostate. So according to the Watchtower, the spiritual consequences of apostasy against the organization is essentially damnation, death without the hope of resurrection. Let's look at the personal consequences. The Watchtower Society teaches its members that apostates are the worst sort of felons, that they have been duped and manipulated by Satan the devil himself, and that they are very dangerous. In the Awake magazine of October 22, 2005, the Watchtower Society speaks of apostates as persons who are actively trying to trick and deceive Jehovah's Witnesses. And I quote, "Like rocks hidden below water, these false Christians mask their real intent beneath a pretense of concern for witnesses. But their goal is to shipwreck the faith of the unwary ones." End quote. So now we see the demonization of the apostate. This person who had questions or doubts has suddenly become an extreme and vicious danger to others. The Watchtower Society warns that they are not sincere in their questions or their objectives, but that they are trying to shipwreck a person's faith. This is an astounding assumption. Further, members are taught that reading apostate literature or even speaking with a family member who has been labeled an apostate is very dangerous, and that Jehovah's Witnesses who do so are actually at risk of being tricked and becoming apostates themselves. Therefore, all Jehovah's Witnesses are instructed to completely shun and avoid all contact with apostates for fear that they will become tricked and become apostates themselves. This is even true if the apostate is a family or a close friend. Jehovah's Witnesses fear questioning the society in this matter or in any other. They honestly believe that if they question the Watchtower Society, they are in essence questioning God. Even though the Watchtower Society has admittedly been wrong many times in its brief history and has had to change its doctrine back and forth, it still demands absolute obedience and unquestioning faith from its followers. No one is allowed to question. No one is allowed to leave. The punishment is disfellowshipping and potentially being branded an apostate, which would ultimately lead to eternal death. So we can see how the Watchtower Society instills fear into its followers. The apostate label is a tool that effectively controls their ability to critically examine the organization's teachings and paralyzes people with fear so they remain silent. So we've seen that by definition, apostasy is the abandonment or rejection of a religious belief. However, we see the Watchtower's definition is quite different. Any kind of person who doubts or chooses to leave the organization will be labeled as a devious and evil threat. So it seems obvious that the Watchtower views these people as a threat. The million-dollar question is why? Why will they go to such lengths to silence someone with questions or doubts? If they had the truth, what would the truth have to fear in the face of objections? Why do they turn the word apostate into a straw man, making a conscientious questioner someone who is supposedly evil, devious, and dangerous? The International Cultic Studies Association provides an analytical checklist to identify cult groups. Here are a few items that are directly relevant to the topic at hand. Decide for yourself.